Thank you so much for joining us From the Field today. I am Brittany Hurst Marchant with the Idaho Wheat Commission, and we are joined today by Albert Adjesiwor, who is the weed science specialist for the University of Idaho out of the Kimberly Research and Extension Center. And he is going to talk to us a little bit about herbicide resistance in weeds. We've seen that as a problem. First of all, I would just like to say thank you so much for tuning in. We know you're very busy with harvest, probably county fairs, getting kids off to school. So we appreciate your time and we hope this is valuable. If you are on this Zoom call live, please feel free to ask questions at any time. You can just unmute your microphone. You can use the reactions at the bottom of your screen right here, or to raise your hand, or you can type your question into the chat and we'll make sure that Albert answers that for you. Albert, if you would like to go ahead and get started by just introducing yourself, that would be great.
All right. Thank you, Brittany. And thank the Wheat Commission for having me. I'm Albert Adjesiwor. I'm the Extension Weed Specialist. And so I do research in just weed control in crops in general. So I do small grains. I do some wheat, sugar beets, small beans, and I do corn and forages too. And so today I'll be talking about, I joined a U of I in 2020, July, good time to join. And it's been fun so far. So yeah, thanks for having me. So today I'll be talking about some best management practices for herbicide-resistant weeds. And so thanks for joining us. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thanks once again for joining. And when Ryan reached out to me about 2 weeks ago and asked if I would talk about weeds, I said, sure. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. So I will jumble through this, and then I'm hoping that this will start some conversations. And if you have any questions, please stop me at any time, or those who are watching afterwards, please, they would have my contact information on the last slide. And so you can contact me with any questions you may have after this. Herbicide-resistant weeds, as Brittany mentioned from the start, is a problem, and we all admit that it's something we have to deal with. And back in 2012, the Wheat Science Society of America published a paper on the best management practices to reduce selection for herbicide resistance and also to manage resistance. And please, you don't have to keep all these 12 things in your head. But basically what it is saying that to effectively manage resistance, you have to know what you're dealing with. And two, make sure that you don't bring any weed seeds to your farm that are already resistant to herbicide, and do everything you can to control the weed effectively. And I would say that I can summarize this into 3 points. Understand what you're dealing with and use a diversified tactics for management. And in all you do, please do all you can to prevent those weeds from going to seed. And I hope that at the end of this conversation, I'm able to convince you why that is very important. Because almost all the weeds that are resistant to herbicide, especially in Idaho, are annual or biennial weeds that produce seed. What that means is that if we are able to prevent those from going to seed, you can do a poor job controlling weed during the season. But if you can prevent those from going to seed, significantly reduce your problem going forward. And I want to say that herbicide resistance starts with the seeds, it continues with seeds, and it always ends with seeds. And so let's pay attention to the weed seed bank, and that's what I want to focus this presentation on today. I probably have shown you this a couple of times, but I would do that again today. When it comes to herbicide resistance, what happens is that you have a field, a bunch of weeds, you spray, those that are susceptible to the herbicide will die. That one living, surviving plants will live and produce seed. And you can see a common theme going forward. It's the seed. If you do a poor job controlling weeds, if there are escapes, if you can prevent those escapes from going to seed, your problem is mostly solved, because then you don't have those seeds going to the soil that will come back to hurt you later in the year. So year 2, you come back, those guys that survived the first time, they produce seed, then those, instead of just one plant, it becomes 3, 4, 5. And that's when you begin to notice that something's wrong. By that time, mostly it's almost too late to prevent the spread of that. And so at that point, all you can do to do everything you can to control those seeds in the soil. And so this process continues until that whole field becomes like unmanageable. And I drove across southern Idaho this summer, and I can tell you there are some fields that are looking so bad. There's a grower, Paul, that had a sugar beet field that has so much kochia that he couldn't kill. And to make things worse, he had a lot of palm amaranth that was introduced through a feedlot that he applied, and it's a nightmare. And so I would try to convince you today that why it's very important for us to focus on managing the seed bank. So why do they keep coming back? You drive through fields, and some fields look like they are sparkling clean. There's nothing there. You'd be like, oh, wow, they did a good job at controlling weeds. And then you go out of grains, you go to a different crop next year, and then all of a sudden, they are back. Why? This is because weeds have what we call a savings account. What we call the seed bank is a weed savings account. Weeds produce a lot of seeds. For example, common lamb's quarters can produce up to 150,000 seeds. Just a small fraction of that is going to come out every single year. And lamb's quarter seeds are going to survive more than 40 years in the soil. So what happens is that if you have escapes, you will be dealing with that guy for years and years and years to come. And so this is why it is very important that in all you do, if you can prevent majority of them from going to seed, if that means that you apply a harvest aid or something during harvest to prevent those guys from going to seed, it will go a long way going forward in helping you manage that. And here is why. For the seed bank, when the plant weed emerges, some might survive, some might die. Most of the time, we focus on what that survive. Those survivors who produce seed, that seed, if you don't control avoid going to seed, to go into the soil, which is the weed savings account. It's what we call a seed bank. And it's literally like kind of like a savings account, like what you have in the bank. They save those seeds to be able to use that later on. In that seed bank, there is a proportion that is non-dormant. What that means is that given the right conditions, those seeds would come up. And there is a fraction that is dormant, meaning that it doesn't matter what you do, those guys will still sit in the soil. And that is where the problem is. Because in weed science, so far, we have things to kill weed seed that are emerging or germinating, which means that that's a non-dormant seed. Those are the pre-emergent herbicide. We have herbicide that will kill weeds that come up. Those are the post-emergent herbicide. We don't have any herbicide, anything that would kill the dormant weed seed except fumigation. And as you probably know, fumigation is probably not the safest option. So we are left in the hands of pathogens that will kill the weed seed, or insect and bugs that will eat those weed seeds in the soil. These two guys are the only ways we can control that dormant portion of the seed bank. And research have shown that herbicide resistance is almost proportional to the size of the seed bank, meaning that the number of seeds you have in the soil determine how many individuals come out the next year. And that has a lot of implications on whether or not you have resistant development going forward. And so This is one of my favorite quotes from a book, that weeds are very smart, and that most weeds will produce a lot of seeds. And those seeds are very small. And because they are very small, they are very light sensitive for the most part. Because for them to come up, they have to be close enough to the soil surface to get sunlight. If they don't get enough sunlight, they know that it is not a good time to come up. And this is why in small grains, because that high density, the small grain just intercepts that much light that you don't have enough light getting to the soil surface. So in small grain canopies, you don't see a lot of weeds under the canopy. If you walk into the sugar beet field right now, you would see a lot of pigweed, a lot of foxtail coming up, because that canopy is not close up like a small grain canopy. And this is why anytime we disturb the soil, like we do tillage, we prep the soil, we now see a new flash of weeds coming up, just because the weeds are able to tell when there is no competition or there is no interception of light. And I will show you why. So I went out and just measured like the light composition on a bright day. And this is like a bare soil, nothing on the soil. You can see this blue light. So water would reflect this blue light. That's why when you take a plane, the sky looks blue. But most importantly, crops would use what we call red light and transmit or reflect far red light, which is close to this end. And so when you have a crop canopy, they will use up most of that red light, and what is left is that far red light. And this is how weed seeds know that there is competition and they will not come up. And I went to the trouble and we sprayed the corn the same day as we till this soil, and this will let this surface bare. You can see how many weed seeds are coming up and how many are coming up under the corn canopy, just because of that blocking of the light. And so what I'm trying to get at is that the fact that you cannot see weeds coming out under the small grain doesn't mean that there are no weeds there. And I think that it's very important that, especially during harvest, and I want to touch on post-harvest weed control after a couple of slides, why that is very important, especially as we're in the harvest season. To make things worse, if you're in a tillage system or till systems, every time we go to do tillage, deep tillage, we bury a layer of the seeds, and that helps them survive a longer time. In no-till systems, or like when you can kind of like chisel plow, you don't turn over the soil, most of those seeds remain in the soil surface. So with time, you are better able to exhaust that seed bank. And so if you are in till systems, please try to control those weeds before they go to seed. If that means that you would have to use a harvest aid during your wheat harvest, please do. And especially if you are in crops, you are in rotational crops like dry beans, sugar beets, those have huge implications because those don't have very dense canopies. And we talk a lot about Italian ryegrass, and this is a field here that someone planted Italian ryegrass as a cover crop. And they went in and tilled that after the cover crop termination. And for 3 years now, every year we still see a huge flash of ryegrass coming up just because those are buried in soil. And so please, I want to rehash this again. Control those weeds before they go to seed is very important for long-term resistance management. And I mentioned, then I touched on this before, that to make things worse, most weed seeds are able to survive very long in the soil. And so if you want to effectively manage resistance, this is your way out. Do effective weed control, but then also prevent those that survive from going to seed. And this is a research done in Virginia. They showed that after 38 years of burial, Jimson weeds still have 91% of the seeds still viable. And lamb squatters, what we have a lot here, still have 7% viable. What means is that if you let those guys go to seed, you'll be dealing with them for a long time. Italian ryegrass will be about 5 years. Kochia will be about 3 years. But then if you let a few guys escape every single year, this continues. And one of the longest running experiment looking at weed seed persistence in Michigan, after 141 years, that was in, I think it was 2021, they still found weeds coming up. And so we will probably be gone and those guys will still be there. And I gave a presentation in Canyon County early in the year, and one person asked me, then why do we even bother? Because we lost the fight already. Yeah, but we would acknowledge if we put up a good fight. And so for long-time resistance management, we know that there is nothing we can do about a dormant portion of the seed bank, which means is that all the things that emerge, even if we kill everything, there'll still be weeds in the soil. For long-term management, we need to prevent weeds from going to seed, and also we need to exhaust whatever they have in the soil already. And so this is a model developed by, let me see if I can get this to work. I will include this. I can put this in the chat after this so that you can look at it. But essentially, you can go in there to look at how your management practices would affect your seed bank density going forward. And let me see if I can just stop sharing this screen and then pull this so that maybe I can show you what I'm talking about here before I go to the post-harvest with seed control. All right. So this is just like a demonstration of why it's very important to control the seed bank. Can you see my screen okay, Ryan? Okay. So say you have just 50 seeds per square meter or square feet at the beginning of the season, and you expect half of those to come up during the season, and how many are killed by insects or diseases? Let's say 20%. And I mentioned that some of those weeds can produce up to 150,000 seeds. Let's just say 20,000 seeds are controlled. Even if you have 95% control of the weed at the end of the season, you go from just 50 seeds to 2,500 seeds just easily, just because you fail to prevent those guys from going to seed. And this is why weeds are always coming back. And so please, this demonstrates why it's very important to control those weeds before they go to seed. You can do it, that 95%, that's a good enough weed control. But then after harvest is a very good opportunity, especially for small grains, to prevent those from going to seed. Let me reshare my presentation here. All right. All right, so we're in harvest season, so I thought I will focus a couple of minutes on post-harvest weed control. And I know you will be asking yourself, we are harvesting, or it's harvesting times, who cares about weeds? Well, I'm a weed scientist, so I'm always thinking about weeds, but I hope I managed to convince you why this is very important. And so I drove around, so we are collecting weed seed now for resistance screening as part of the PNW, Herbicide Resistance Initiative. We are collecting from small grains and sugar beets just because some of the weed like lamb's quarters, prickle lettuce, it's hard to let them go to seed in small grains. You will have to go back after harvest, and in most irrigated systems, they're going to till after harvest, and so we are trying to capture some of those in rotational crops. I've seen a lot of fields like this where after harvest, you see a bunch of kochia here. This is pigweed, and there's some lamb's quarters that are all going to seed. There's some Russian thistle going to seed. If we do everything right during the season to manage weeds, and we let this happen after harvest, we protected our yield from weeds, but we have done almost nothing in terms of long-term management of the weeds. And just because of what I just showed you a couple of minutes ago. And I can see some prickle lettuce. I can see here a long track and see the whole field that is going to go to seed if you don't come back and control this. And I know that especially those who irrigate their small grains, they apply some water to get the volunteers to come up. And if you do that, that would even gonna help these guys. And I would want to challenge you that if you can, please apply herbicide to control those broadleaf weeds before you apply your water to get the volunteers up. Just that would help you in the long term to manage the weed seed bank. And I want to say that during the season, small grains are very competitive and they would suppress those weeds. But once you take that competition off, those weeds are just going to take off. And if you don't control those, if you are in the dry land system, those are going to use the soil moisture. Those that you let to go grow would also produce seed. Some research they've done in Montana, and I've shown that if you let kochia go after harvest, they can produce up to 4,100 seeds per plant. That is a lot if you know what kochia is, and especially if you go to rotational crops like sugar beet or corn or something next year, that's going to be a huge problem for you. And so please, it's very important to control those weeds after harvest. And they look at herbicide options for controlling kochia, and there are several herbicide options, and we've done some work with Corey and with the Wheat Commission that we have a bunch of herbicide chemistries tested. So please, if you need any specific recommendation, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be more than happy to send you those results. But what they found is that if you apply dicamba and 2,4-D, those would only reduce seed production by 50%, give or take. You would have to throw in something else like glyphosate or paraquat or glufosinate, which is Liberty, or Chaperon. And I love Chaperon because it's used as a harvest aid. And so that's also a good time for you to be able to throw in something like that to produce, to reduce seed production. And so please, it works if you have an effective herbicide. Effectively, you prevent them from going to seed, and that goes a long way in helping to manage those weeds. And this is a research funded by the Wheat Commission, where we are looking at how crop rotation and herbicide programs would have, how the impact will have on the seed bank going forward. This is just after 2 years of the rotation in the herbicide program. We are not seeing significant difference yet, but what this pre plus post means that every crop in the rotation, we throw in a soil-applied herbicide or a pre-emergent herbicide. And this post-emergence only means that every crop in the rotation, we only apply post-emergence herbicide. Just after 2 years, we are still seeing some separation already in terms of how many weed seeds go into the soil. And this is the 3rd year, and this is the bean in the wheat rotation this year. And then no herbicide for 3 years. I can guarantee you there are beans in this year, it's just impossible to see them. This is a complete loss. If you use only post-emergence herbicide every single year for 3 years, this is what we are seeing. And we are guaranteed that this year we're going to see a yield knock and we're going to see a huge difference in the seed bank. If we throw in a soil-applied herbicide every single year for 3 years, almost no weed in the bean. And this will have huge implications for the seed bank management, for resistance management in the long term. So I want to summarize or finish by saying that for reducing the seed bank in terms of resistance management, it needs a sustained effort. And for small grain growers especially, please, post-harvest weed control is very important because wheat is very competitive during the growing season. But then after you take that competition off, those guys will take off and it can be a nightmare really quickly. Remember, no seed, no wheat. And most of our resistance comes from weeds that produce seed. And so please, in all we do, let's manage those and try and prevent those from going to seed in terms of resistance management. And with that, thank you for having me. This is my contact information, my email address, my phone number. You can contact me. We have specific recommendations for weed control, and we have results that we can share with you. And so please, if you need any materials or resources, please reach out. I'll point you in the right direction. So with that, thanks again for having me, and I would answer any question you may have.
Thank you, Albert. That was great. Jim, it looks like Jim has a question. Go ahead.
Sure. So Albert, you convinced me now that we cannot win. Okay. So the best we're working for now is a stalemate, right? The challenge on top of this, though, is you really have to have a commitment to a long-term strategy, not just chemical rotations, not just tillage, not just crop rotations, and stay committed to that. And then deal with the annual economic fluctuations on top of that to try to stay committed. So how do you think about this in long term, and how a grower is going to have to balance short and long term to get at this control?
That's a good point, Jim. And it sounds like a losing battle, but it's probably not. And I think that a lot of growers, especially and in Idaho, what works in our favor is our crop rotation. We have diverse crop rotation, so that gives us chances to manage different weeds in the cropping system. And so crop rotation is probably our best chance, because with that doesn't cost us anything. And what that means is that if I, and I'm gonna go use irrigated systems as an example. If I go from wheat to dry beans are planted in May or June down here. And so by that time, wild oat is up already. Ryegrass is up already. So even the tillage operation alone would help you control that at probably not that much cost going forward. And so that alone works hugely in our advantage, especially in here. And in not in the Midwest, where you just have corn and soybean, where they have almost all the same herbicide level for both crops, and so it doesn't do them any good. But so crop rotation is our best chance going forward. Those in dryland systems, yeah, there are options. Mustards and canola and that kind of like oilseed crops that will give you like several tools to control those weeds that would not be present in the wheat per se. In terms of economics, that's tricky. And we just did some review where we found that in certain crops, like that don't have a lot of herbicide options, relying on herbicide for resistance management is impossible. It's not gonna work, because economics just doesn't work in your favor. And so I would say that for our growers, just diversify your rotation as much as possible. Going from wheat to barley is not diversifying your rotation, because you use the same tools. So I think that crop diversity in terms of rotation is your best chance. And then if you have to apply, there are cheaper options in terms of herbicide to do that after crop harvest to control weeds, like 2,4-D and your dicamba. And glyphosate is not that cheap right now. Gramoxone will be a cheap option too. And so the objective here is to prevent them from going to seed. So you might not even have to go to the highest rate possible, but just a low end of the rate, something to just knock them back enough to prevent them from going to seed before that first killing frost. And so I know the economics, it looks like the short term is hard, but I guarantee that if we don't do anything about it, the long-term effect is probably more costly than not doing anything. So we have to do something. And that would mean that we have to rely more on crop rotation and look at the cheapest option after crop harvest to control those weeds.
Right, because we're not going to be seeing lots of new chemistries, lots of new chemicals on the market. I mean, so it really is being smart with the ones we have and trying to use other practices to minimize that vulnerability, I'm sure. You know, and like you say, dryland cropping systems are a different ballgame, because you don't have as many options, but you do have to be smart, and you still have to be committed longer term to what chemical rotations and practices you have. So it's not easy. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not easy, and it's especially in dryland system where the yields are not that high, and it's things can add up really quickly. So I do understand why people do what they do sometimes, but it's if we don't do anything about it, there are little things that we can do that would go a long way in helping in the long term.
So maybe a little different question. Maybe this is a little off the wall, but I mean, the soil microbiome is very diverse. Is there a way to promote the soil microbiome, fungals, other things that will help deteriorate those seeds faster?
Yeah, that's a good question. We we submitted a grant in 2021, trying to look at that aspect where, like, what can we do? Or are there any specific microbe that I want to promote that will kill weed seeds?
Yeah.
And we didn't get the money, and I wasn't surprised because it's complicated. It's hard to do that.
Sure.
But I think, especially I know in irrigated systems, cover crops help sometimes to build some organic matter, and that does help in terms of microbiology, microbiomes. But in dryland systems, sometimes just don't get enough biomass to make a huge difference. And so and with lack of moisture, that just makes it harder. So I think our best chance, especially in dryland systems, to do all we can to prevent most of them from going to seed. And that's our best chance at kind of driving down how many are in the soil. And
reduced tillage, I assume, also reduces the number of seeds that will germinate and start to grow, right?
Yes. So if you're in a no-till system, you tend to, if you just right now you just start a no-till systems, you tend to see more weeds coming about with time, because you then turn over the soil. Most of the weeds are in the soil surface, so the most you can get out and kill them, then you dry down those numbers going forward. In till systems, where we just keep turning it over and over, you just bury the weed seed and bring them back in the following year. It's just a never-ending cycle, right. And so it's tough.
So Albert, would you comment just a little bit about your role in the regional project that's being funded now, and how you see that project evolving?
So that's a good question, Jim. So my role is leading the Idaho team, and our objective for this year is to do the survey to know, like, get a snapshot of what the problem is. We know already the resistance we have in the state. We just don't know how widespread they are. And then we've started a bunch of studies just looking at different things. One of the things we are looking at, especially in northern Idaho, where they mostly rely on Zidua to control ryegrass. And so they apply soil-applied herbicide. Sometimes they don't get good weed control. And one of the things we suspect is that the ryegrass starts to germinate by the time they apply the herbicide, because sometimes it's too wet in the spring to go into the field. And so one of the things we are looking at now is how much does delaying that application kind of affect how effective the herbicide is. And that way we can start to tell people that, okay, if you're applying Zidua, you cannot get in the field earlier, you might probably have to throw in something else to control those that are coming up already. That will go a long way to help. Another thing we are looking at in terms of dryland systems is we are promoting soil-applied herbicide a lot, but sometimes we don't have enough moisture to activate those herbicide in dryland systems. And so we're trying to look at what is the least amount of moisture you need to activate those herbicide. And are we telling growers to throw away money when they apply those herbicide in dryland system because they don't have enough moisture? So that's just two aspects that we're looking at. Right. We are also trying to develop just some models to try to predict when those weeds start to come up. And so our thermal gradient table finally arrived from Netherlands. And so we have that hooked up right now, that we are trying to start our germination studies, where we're trying to look at how temperature affect how fast those weeds come up. That we can start be able to predict when growers should go in and apply those soil-applied herbicide or post-emergence herbicide. We are also going to look at how temperature affects herbicide activation. And so if you apply soil-applied herbicide, if it's too cold, it's too hot, are you throwing away your money? How effective that is. And John is also looking at, she bought some prototype of blue light units. She said she probably would have two of those units right now. I'm looking at how that might help our growers who want to adopt our technology in terms of managing weed seed at crop harvest. And so it's a unit attached to a combine. You harvest, the chaff flows into that, and presumably supposed to help to control those weed seeds, kind of kill those weed seeds. So that one aspect. And then we have some long-term trials going forward too that we trying to look at the seed bank stuff. If you have resistance already and you try to throw in some management practices, how does that help you drive down that seed bank going forward? We haven't started those already because it's taken a long time to plan those, to get those in. So that's just a snapshot of some of the things we have going on. Would have at least preliminary results for most of those studies for the spring research review meeting that we are hoping to at least give you some update on what we found so far.
Well, I think it's great you have the regional team assembled and funded now, and it's going to be exciting to see what you guys come up with. So thank you very much, Albert.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat. No one else has unmuted their microphone. So thank you so much, Albert, for joining us. Thank you, all of you who tuned in to listen to this, either live or the recorded version afterward on our YouTube channel or our podcast channels. You can feel free to share this episode with friends or neighbors who you think would benefit from it. And you can find it, or they can find it at Idaho Wheat is the handle on wherever they get their podcasts, and then also YouTube. So thank you so much, Albert. We appreciate all you do, and it's always it's an uphill battle, like Jim said, to keep those weeds under control. But with your help, we have a few more tools in our toolbox. So thank you so much. And we will see you all next month back here for the next From the Field. Good luck with harvest.
Thanks for having me.